Look, and thank you for your presentations earlier. I listened in on them. I want to hone in particularly on, and I want to commend the good work that's been done in Mayo right across the county, but we have a problem in where there isn't a growing population. So for instance, say for Midfield School, say in Swinford, where you have 60 pupils there, and the school has been going since 1964. Where there's very poor infrastructure within the school. So they have no hall, for instance, no hall of any shape or size whatsoever, and they've been trying to get that for a number of years. So what strategy do you have for the current condition of school facilities such as that? Because those 60 pupils are as entitled to a hall and a play area as anywhere else. So what's possible there, and how can we progress that? In another incident, say where there isn't a suitable playground outside to facilitate children with disabilities, particularly children in wheelchair. So you have a situation in Bangor National School, for instance, where it's not possible to bring somebody out in a wheelchair. And there is a wheelchair user there. So nobody can use the yard, because you can't have a situation where you have a child in a wheelchair looking over at a wall at other children playing. So again, in that instance, we're not talking about very large sums of money here, but we're talking about larger than the Works programme in order for that to be done. So what funding streams are available to that? Again, just in terms of very basic things like a shelter. So where children can go outside. I mean, I remember from my school days anyway, the importance of the shelter, particularly in the west of Ireland, where you can go in from the rain, so you're not going in it's soaked wet again. So you have a situation, say, in Solya National School in Achill, where they don't have that shelter there, and they have been applying for it for years and years, and they have done a lot of fundraising for it, but it's still out of their reach in terms of being able to get that done. I want to ask you in terms of, so I suppose with that as well, how do we get the balance between what needs to be done in terms of climate change and what needs to be done in terms of very basic facilities for children, if all children are to be treated equally? When will the summer work scheme be open for applications for 2023? And how are we going to get the balance, I suppose, between the climate projects and the traditional maintenance work and repairs that need to be done and things that need to be done there? Construction inflation. For all of these in the pipeline, how are you dealing with the fact that schools will have in submissions and costings, and now they will find that the builders, obviously like construction inflation across the board, are you allowing for extra funding for that, for construction inflation? And indeed, in terms of the summer scheme, will that allow again for inflation there in terms of what people can get for it? I have a number of other questions, but maybe just to give you time to answer those. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy, and a good range of questions there. I suppose in general, when you look at the last 20 years or so, the plan and building units focused has been largely on provision of additional capacity. So that's where the bulk of our focus was, the bulk of our funding going. And that was sort of reflecting the demographic growth at primary, moving on into post-primary. And where we're at now in that journey is we have to see out post-primary, we have to see out special needs and how that works through. But if you look ahead to our sort of the next sort of 10, 15, 20 years and look towards climate generally and 2030 targets, 2050 targets, that there'll be a much increased emphasis on the modernisation of existing infrastructure. And working that through, and as part and parcel of that, doing that in an integrated way as part of just the modernisation of school facilities generally as well. Because we're conscious that with the last period, the big focus on additional capacity, it meant that schools, as you reference yourself there, if they weren't in that additional capacity space, they weren't getting significant projects. The sort of way they have been managed up to now is essentially looking at what the opportunities are for those schools through the likes of summer work scheme, that sort of, and that's a very important scheme that has delivered a lot of good work over the years.
Which, see, where there's so many competing demands, so you might have a situation where the windows desperately need to be done and the yard needs to be done or the shelter needs to be done, so there isn't the room there within the summer work scheme. So is there something that can be done to uphold the rights of the children who are using those schools?
Yeah. I know we're conscious of that, but we're also conscious that individual and local schools are best placed to know and understand their local priorities as well. And I suppose as part and parcel of the summer works, one of the areas that we're looking and planning on is sort of a particular climate emphasis on summer works, the climate focus. But
you understand that if the shelter isn't there, the climate is very important in terms of children being kept warm. And I don't want to, but I really just need to come out of here with some kind of hope for these schools that they are going to be listened to. And you're right, they know, the families know, the teachers know, and all that. So what can?
Yeah, well, I suppose in the short term, I suppose the sort of immediate sort of emergency issues and things like that, no more than the likes of wheelchair access and things like that, which is a basic and important in supporting a child in a school. Our emergency work scheme will be the funding mechanism for dealing with that. Our summer works is sort of a mechanism for dealing with the more substantial projects. But ultimately, the overall rollout of our deep energy retrofit programme over the lifetime of the NDP and beyond to meet 2030, 2050 targets is ultimately where the direction of travel will ultimately go in terms of just dealing with climate and dealing with modernisation.
I know, but the children who are there now, they will have children and grandchildren before we get around to doing, and I'm really not being obstreperous here. I just really need to know for the kids who are there right here, right now, and need something as basic as a shelter, or they need the yard to be done. Those type of things that are they keep getting refused for in terms of emergency schemes.
And if the condition of those is very difficult and a real health and safety issue, the emergency work scheme is the mechanism for dealing with that. Other than that, then the summer work scheme and the climate focused summer work scheme will be opportunities for upgrade generally. But I suppose the bigger and wider picture is sort of through the deep energy retrofit programme. But I'm also aware that schools and rural schools have got support from our colleague departments in terms of rural affairs, in terms of just leader type funding, which has helped to improve facilities locally as well, and that's important.
I want to just say to you here today, there's ones that are dropping through the net that won't get CLAR, won't get leader, won't get any of those, and it is the responsibility of the Department of Education to ensure that their education, and my colleague Donncha O'Leary talked about the importance of physical activity earlier on as well, that is done. So I would just ask you, maybe coming out of here, to just look at those schools in what can be done, because it makes enormous difference to the lives of children who are right here, right now, need those very basic facilities.
No. I note the point that you raised, Deputy, and I suppose sitting in my seat as head of the Planning Building Unit, my span cuts across 4,000 schools, so there's priorities to be managed all across that. The other general point that you raised, Deputy, as well is about construction inflation. And we reflect that and manage that, because ultimately projects have to be delivered where there is a need. There's constitutional obligations, there's legal obligations in terms of delivery of education provision. And we would update our basic building costs to reflect that. And over the last year, a bit more than a year, we'd have updated our building costs by 21%. That reflects that. That creates its own budgetary pressures and managing those. And, government has recognised the importance of supporting education. And, along with our NDP funding in 2022, for example, we got a supplementary budget of 300 million. And that was very positive, very helpful, and recognised the very strong delivery by the Planning Building Unit over the course of 2022.
So where there's huge gaps, the schools can go back to yourselves and say, look, this is the gap between the code, and you'll consider those.
Well, I suppose in my job, a lot of schools knock on my door every day, and I suppose our job is to help prioritise and deal with those needs as best we can, given the constraints we have to operate as well.
Thank you.